program of where you redistribute, you reallocate, you use the resources that are currently dedicated to warfare and armaments and so on in ways that advance the well-being of communities all around the world. It's hardest to imagine maybe in Mali or Somalia, but on the other hand, it's possible to imagine that that kind of an investment could go much further in those places in the world, in those kinds of culture, that there are developmental tools and resources around sustainability and renewability and economic development that could be applied in those communities in ways that would reduce the tendency, the temptation to respond to violence with violence, to respond with occupation and dispossession and so on with violence. So that's a larger sort of a conceptual concept about an engaged pacifism. Dwayne Cady has a wonderful book where he reminds us that pacifism is a continuum, that there are people at one end of the pacifist spectrum that are absolutist in terms of being nonviolent and disengaged, but pacifism can also represent a way of engaging in the world that's more active. The only other two points I would want to make is remind us that the impossibility of succeeding through the use of violence or conflict has driven people like Gandhi and Khan Bacha Khan and other pacifists to transform relationships to the empire in ways that were largely nonviolent. It doesn't mean that they didn't suffer a great deal, but they used nonviolent techniques. Many of us probably have heard or reread in the last couple of days Martin Luther King Jr.'s Beyond War speech at Riverside Church on April 4th, the year before he was assassinated, in which he reminded people that he'd been in Chicago and Los Angeles and Watts after riots. He'd been a lot of places where people were arguing that the only way that change was going to come was going to come through violence. And King said, that's foolishness. The empire, the United States, has state police, local police, armies, etc. There's no way we could win that. Nonviolence is the only way of responding. And FOR had an integral part in King's developing that perspective and institutionalizing that perspective. And certainly there's a long way yet to go in terms of race relations in this country, but we got to where we are because a community that was demonized, discriminated against, dispossessed, responded with nonviolence, didn't use war. And I think, well, our conversation has sort of been presented on the broad platform of war, that actually it's good to remember, it's good to look for, it's good to ask ourselves, where are the analogies in other levels of conflict in the world that are resolved nonviolently, and how are those principles applied? So I wanted, there were inferences about Gandhi and others in terms of your remarks. And then I think the last thing that I feel called to respond to would be, I would look at Gaza, Israel, the Palestinian Israel through a different lens. If we'd start at a different place, and here we have the risk of getting down to a level of detail to which there's no resolution. But even this last week, fire back and forth between Gaza and Israel, one can argue that the Palestinians are responding to, not initiating, not the retaliation issue. And again, that Israel, you said Israel has to respond because they're operating within a conflict of states, but Israel could. It's imaginable. Israel could take a developmental, a constructive, a positive response. It's an enormously rich state with enormously rich assets. And we know the Rand Corporation, for example, a private not-for-profit in the United States, has designed a way of bridging the economic differences between the Israelis and the Palestinians in a way that would respect the integrity of those two communities but tie them together economically. That there are models out there that could simply stop history. They could simply stop history and start it up again in a new way. There may not be a lot of evidence of that working, but moral imagination that one can't imagine stopping history. Jonathan Lear's book on the Native Americans, the history of the Indians in this country, for whom history ended when the buffalo were killed, is a reminder that for some people's history does end, and they have to then respond or engage in other ways, and that we can I talked too long.
Well,
Over to you.
I was only using the situation with Israel as an example of why states respond. I mean, I totally agree with you totally. I mean, I think Israel's policy, especially as it's been following the last 20 years, is a policy of war. Where they're building in the occupied zone, and they're building walls. I mean, what the Israelis have been doing the last 20, 30 years is creating this huge gap between them and the Palestinians. And there are a lot of different courses, and I think if you talk to original Zionists and liberal Jews, and liberals in Israel, they're appalled at what their country is doing, and they've been speaking out. But Israel is a case in point. But I think what's happening here is structures. Is you, like my comment before, you have to change structures. So, for instance, again, the Vietnam War is such an excellent example of that war is a classic example of the bureaucrat war. I mean, the bureaucracy, the national security bureaucracy framed the issue in a certain way, and they followed that issue to the logic. They exaggerated the threat. And Vietnam was no threat to the United States. If Vietnam went communist, it really wouldn't have mattered. It wasn't the same situation as Korea. Vietnam was, this little third world country struggling for its independence, and everybody would have been a lot happier off if they just let Ho Chi Minh do his thing. And it's not that the North Vietnamese and the communists were angels, because they weren't. I mean, if you look at the history of North Vietnam in the late 50s, I mean, they did their collectivization, and they did some bad things, and they took away people's rights and stuff like that. But, every country has to find their own path. But I think it's the structure of the bureaucracy which led to war. Same thing with the Iraqi war. Why did we fight in Iraq? You really have to look at the foreign policy structure. So being a pacifist isn't going to stop these wars. What you have to do is you have to change the way the structures operate, the way the bureaucracies operate in America. And that's a very difficult thing. And I think if we look at Obama has been very cautious. I mean, Obama's not going to go to war with Iran. Romney probably would. Obama's not going to do it. I mean, we can examine Obama's decision. Why did Obama decide to put more troops in Afghanistan? Remember the surge in Afghanistan? He was going off the assumption that the surge in Iraq worked. It didn't really work. What did we do? What did we accomplish in Afghanistan other than spend $500 billion chasing people around? I mean, I don't know. I mean,
the pharmaceutical companies made a lot of money.
They could have. Well, people are always going to make a lot of money in wars, and people are going to lose. Mainly us, we're going to lose a lot of money in wars. I mean, because we can all think of better ways that $1 trillion could have been spent. On infrastructure, job training, revitalized cities, and stuff like that. So it's not that I reject the pacifists and that I'm against what you're saying. I just don't think that you can. My point was, I just don't think that you can step outside of these structures that control how we act. I mean, Obama, you could make an argument that Obama could, even though he probably didn't want to do the surge, his vice president didn't want to do it, but Obama had this huge institutional, bureaucratic organization, so we got to put another 20,000 troops in. And Obama, in the end, couldn't resist that. It's sort of like Johnson in Vietnam. Johnson said, well, Vietnam is a total mess, and if we go in there, we can hear him on the tapes. What did Johnson say? I feel like
Put American boys
doing
a job that Asian boys should do for themselves.
Yeah, he said that. He also said, I feel like a hitchhiker in a Texas hailstorm. I can't go forward, I can't go back, and I can't make a stop. So what do? You just kind of, okay, the bureaucracy says do this, and he could not escape from that Cold War thinking, because that Cold War thinking was so powerful. So maybe the question is, how do we change that thinking? Maybe that's what you're getting to. How do we change that thinking? Now, I guess I would argue more towards realistic. I mean, nations are going to go to war. We're going to have threats. There are going to be times, it's very situational, there's going to be times that we're going to use force. What are the most cost-effective and moral ways that we can use force without bankrupting ourselves? I mean, again, going back to that Thucydidean equation. This is a very difficult equation. Just like what you're saying, it's very difficult to apply the pacifist model. It's also extremely difficult to apply, fighting wars with good sense and intelligence.
It must be an interesting case study that comes from the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
Because, first of all, the Soviets, the Russians lost so many people in the Second World War, they had a different attitude about violence and conflict. Somehow they went through that collapse without violence. That's a big bureaucracy, that's a big system. It doesn't look entirely different today, but it's a lot different without having gone through a conflict.
Well, there's a lot of reasons why the Soviet Union's collapsed. One is they just couldn't, when you tell a lie for so long, eventually it catches up with you. I mean, they did.
Wouldn't you say the same thing about America, though? Because they've been telling a while last time.
Well, America is.
Step in.
Go ahead.
Step in a minute.
All right.
Because it sounds like we're ready to move into our discussion, and I just want to
Yeah,
introduce
that's
our
a
moderator.
loaded question.
Well, I can talk about that for
So
that.
hold it a second. Okay.
Yes and no.
Lori Orella is going to help moderate the discussion tonight. And Lori is a social activist and a clinical psychologist in private practice in Dutchess County, where she specializes in trauma, adolescents, and families. In 2009, she founded the Veteran Family Support Alliance, also known as VetFAMSA, in response to concerns about PTSD, suicide, and other needs of troops returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. Since then, she's been trained as a facilitator for the Veteran-Civilian Dialogues, and there's information about that on the table sheet. And she has chaired or co-chaired a number of projects to raise awareness about the needs of veterans and military families. Dr. Orella is thankful for the invitation to serve as forum discussion moderator this evening, a unique and welcome opportunity to share her lifelong interest in promoting a sustainable peace here at home and in the world. Dr. Orella.
Thank you. So we should establish a couple of quick ground rules, if we can, so that as many people can speak as possible. I assume that some of your comments are directed at a particular speaker, but maybe there's opportunities to speak a little more openly. Maybe if you could try to combine your questions to questions rather than having each one then become speeches, which is very difficult. So we might have to cut you off after 2 or 3 minutes if your response is going on 2 minutes. If I could kick it off myself, I was trained by Professor Morton Deutsch at Teachers College, Columbia University, who did some very much groundbreaking work involved with trying to understand the issues that lead us to war and what alternatives there are for destructive conflict resolution. And some of his teachings have shown up in the most important negotiations internationally in our times. And one of the things that stuck with me as a student was the idea of safety, that really what we're all seeking is that sense of a sustainable peace, meaning that we feel safe within it. And I personally have some problems understanding the bridge between pacifism in a world that feels so dangerous. Is there not maybe another kind of presence that a country as strong and technologically advanced as ours could play in the world, something like cops, that we're a presence that enables safe conversations to happen. So I'll throw my first question back to.
Yeah, I think there are many ways in which language is shaped by culture and history over periods of time. I think that the notion of safety has become defined within the context of security. It's got a policing ring to it. When safety could mean well-being, and the argument is that if you create a context of well-being where you have good schools where kids are taught to feel good about themselves, if you have health care where people have access to resources when they're not well, if you have an economy in which people have jobs for which they're fairly paid, you begin to create a context of well-being that really defines what safety is, rather than the policing needs. And certainly we all have to be frightened at this point in terms of where we are around some of those issues today in terms of the problems of safety.
Yes.
I would like to suggest that there's another way. No, let me start again. I would suggest that violence and nonviolence have to be in a broader framework. We no longer live in a system of states. Ever since the Bretton Woods institutions, ever since the World Trade Organization, we have gone beyond what used to be called the Westphalian system, the system of states. Violence today is not just these arbitrary wars of choice. Violence today is structural violence of the dispossession, the dislocation, the disvaluing of people by we would call it by their current name, austerity economics, that makes it impossible for people to have any kind of life. Violence now is structural violence, and nonviolence has got to be stretched too. Nonviolence has got to have a component of an alternative economics in it. What Gandhi called living in truth, what Havel called living in truth, means let's get aware of the context we're in. We're not in the system of states. That whole discourse about one nation going to war, that has no relevance to the context we're in. Structural violence is a reality. Violence is much broader than war, and nonviolence has got to be a living in truth that recognizes that context.
Well, I'd like to respond. First off, when you say we're not in a system of states, I mean, I can walk down that path so far, but states haven't disappeared. The best you can say is that we're in a transitional period where nation states have become less important. I mean, certainly you can look at this economic, like what is a multinational company? I mean, they have companies like GE. They're doing most of their sales outside of the United States anymore. Are they an American company anymore? You can talk about that. You can go down that. But just like in any era, institutions and structures don't just disappear all at once. They disappear over time. And I don't think we've reached the point where the nation state has disappeared.
Look at the ancient agreements of the World Trade Organization and the 60,000 multinational corporations work within that framework.
Well,
Sir, if I
yeah,
could
that
just,
is a different framework
could
is
I make a request?
developing. Go ahead.
Let me make a request that we do not do the crosstalk. I will make every effort to give you another acknowledgement to speak again. If there aren't 6 more people, we'll also raise their hands. Okay.
But no, the system of states, I mean, yes, the system of states is evolving, it's changing since World War II, definitely. And there's more international organizations. But one thing that these international organizations certainly are not strong enough to prevent all this low-scale warfare that we're seeing. I mean, the new system of international, all these structures, can't deal with Al-Qaeda, can't deal with rogue states like North Korea or with Afghanistan. So we're in a transition period. I'll say that with you. The state system isn't totally gone, the Westphalian state system isn't gone, but we still haven't established a strong world government. Maybe we're ahead in that area economically. I can agree with you with I mean, look at the euro today. The Europeans say, oh, we're going to have a euro, and it's going to be great, and we're going to share, and everybody's going to be rich, and stuff like that. And now what you're having is really what the euro means is Northern Europe oppressing Southern Europe. I mean, for a while there was a free train ride, everybody was buying all, let's buy Greek bonds, just like German bonds, and let's all live a life, because the Southern Europeans want to live the same living standards as the Germans, and now the bill came due, and they're saying, in my God, scheiße, it's not working anymore. And now the Germans are saying, no, you guys got to do this, this, and this. That's imperialism, and that's oppression. I agree with that. And if the euro falls apart, it's going to be over that. So I can go with you partway down that path, but I don't know if the state system has totally disappeared.
Other hands here?
I kind of have like a two-part question for both of you.
You speak loud.
Yeah, I have like a two-part question for both of you. It's just along the lines of when do you think that society would recognize that the customs that we live under currently are that of myths? Like, if you look back at ancient Egypt, per se, they used to say they derived like their power from the gods. Like they said themselves that they were the gods. And then over time that's become, oh, they got their power from the gods, and then it just became a big bureaucracy. So the question of when do you think people are going to realize the fact that statism is no different than religion? And I also wanted to hear kind of your like viewpoint towards the non-aggression principle.
The
Non-aggression principle.
You want to go first? I can deal with that first one.
I was going to go first, but you're going to let me go first.
It's all yours, Bob.
You know, I think the answer to the first question is never. But in this sense, that there's always a national narrative. And in fact, the promise or hope for the future is to write a narrative in which there's greater equity, greater respect, greater tolerance, where there's room for pluralism. And so the problem is that we're still stuck in a narrative that fails to affirm 200 years of slavery and the continuing oppression of people of color. The next narrative will have to treat that differently. We hear this sometimes more openly because we have a little distance in terms of the Palestinians and the Israelis. And the work that I've done in the Middle East has always started with the challenge of critiquing the narratives that define the conflict and then seeking a narrative that will carry people beyond that. But I think as a people, we're a storytelling people, we're a myth-making people. That is a part of the human construct. And so I do believe that that balance between the conscious process of seeking the narrative or the myth versus the living of it is always going to have some gray area. You're sort of always moving.
Yeah.
People don't live a life by what is true. It's what they live a life by what they think is true. And I guess what happens is when you have reality and then you have your myth, and when that difference between reality and myth gets too big, that creates tension, and then the myth will collapse. When that's going to happen, I don't know. I mean, is the state a myth? I mean,
Where does it get its power from?
it gets its power from people believing in the state. We pay our taxes.
Same place God gets their power.
Right. Well, but if the state is that humans come together for the purpose of creating the use of Constitution more perfect union and stuff like that. States are organic things. They're constantly changing. They're constantly shifting. There's currents and cross currents. You know, like you can look at the 1950s. Oh, that was a placid era. No, the 1950s was not a placid era. There's all kinds of things going on in the 1950s. You know, you have this one placid, okay, everything's great, but underneath it, women are going to work. There's a sexual revolution brewing. There's racism brewing. There's all sorts of things going on in the 1950s. It's not happy days are here again. And that's in any session. That's in any era.
I think there was a part two, or was that a subset that the principle of non-aggression is one of our myths?
No, that was just more along the lines of the non-aggression principle, for anyone who doesn't know, is just pretty much the idea that the initiation of violence is wrong. You have the right to defend yourself, but just the fact of the initiation of violence is the wrongdoing. It goes along those lines.
I think that if you look in the international state system, like Canada and the United States settle the disputes without violence. In general, between Europe and the United States, we settle violence. Is that, okay, but then we got to get everybody to agree to that. So how do you deal with people who don't want to accept that principle? That's where the issue comes in.
Your hands here a little earlier.
Yeah, I have something that's troubling me. I've been around long enough to remember the Depression in 1929 and Roosevelt's helping us recover. And it seemed to me that the biggest part of the recovery came when we entered the Second World War. And so that war seems to be a question of dollars, among other things. And I'm concerned that in our capitalist country, in our structure, that the profit motive is driving too many of the decisions that are made in this country. So I asked myself, what could change that? And I must say that it's become clear to me. I've gotten very friendly with a movement called the Bruderhof. I don't know if you know that, but there are a couple of people here from the Bruderhof right there. Yes, it's a Christian community, and I'm not a Christian, but I see the value in the love and the caring and the interactions, and also the simpler way of living. You grow your own food, you don't poison it with genetically engineered seed so that Monsanto makes a fortune and everybody else gets cancer, among other things. And you address what's right and best for the world, and that's not happening. And I don't see the solution, because the battle between the Democrats and the Republicans in this country now about reducing profits, taxing the people who are making a lot of money, and there's plenty of advertisements that say they're not even paying income tax. And where people are victimized by it. We don't teach people how to live simply. We throw everything out to the dumps, which are now full. All the dumps in Rockland County have been closed for years.
Well, the first
What the solution really is.
I wish I knew. I'm going to run for president. First off, the depression
Excuse me, by the way, Reconciliation has a card that I bought, a bunch of them, with a quote on it from Martin Luther King. It says, if you want a peaceful world, feed the hungry.
I agree.
Right. You have one in the back, and then one over here, and then I'll come back to you. Yes?
Yeah, I think she hits a point with the profit motive, and I think you, Mr. Mott, are missing the main point here. What we have to deal with is what the U.S.'s purpose and cause for war is, not how we can resolve wars among these other countries. We've got to deal with ourselves first. And the fact is that the United States goes to war to get its way, to get the resources, the greed, and the power to accomplish that is what is maintained. 50 invasions since World War II, more than 50, of other countries to get the United States' way. A military budget larger than all the other military budgets in the world combined. 750 to 1,000 military bases in other countries, up to 130 countries around the world. So the war is based on getting what the U.S. wants. If it can't get it by buying it, which is its first method, then it gets it by this overwhelming military force. So the question to you is, how do you address that without skirting around what the purpose of this is from the U.S.'s point of view?
Thank you.
I don't think that most people, and it's a very difficult thing to wrap your brain around, is the world international system that was created in Bretton Woods and all the international policies. I'll give you an example. What is the budget, Dennis?
16 trillion.
Whatever. And so why can the United States run such a huge budget deficit? Is because the dollar is a world currency, people buy our dollars. If we weren't a world power, then we'd have to balance our federal budget, which wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, but would it mean for millions of Americans that we'd have to live a lower standard of living? Now, as you say, maybe that's a good thing. I don't know if we all can go and start a farm, but the world system, America's a classic world power, just like ancient Rome, just like Britain. It fights wars to maintain its perception of the world system, to maintain its profit, right? Now, in the next 20, 30 years, the US dollar is going to cease to be a world currency. It's going to be a basket of currencies. We can see the writing on the wall, right? This
So
is
what's going to be
a basket of world currencies.
what's going to be the one that's going to come up after this?
It's going to be a basket. It's not going to be just one currency. But it's going to mean drastic changes in the way we live. I mean, it's going to mean, well, the government of the United States can't run $22 trillion in deficit or whatever. It's going to mean that we can't afford this already. You mentioned the drones. One of the reasons we're doing the drones, because it's a lot cheaper than sending troops in. It means that we're not going to be able to afford to invade 50 countries over 50 years.
Thank you.
So it's going to change.
Yes, the lady in gray, and you might introduce yourself, Pat, since your late husband was so seriously
Yes.
involved with War and Peace.
Paul O'Dwyer, I'm Pat O'Dwyer. My question is that natural disasters are violent. They destroy things, they kill people, and yet we are warned that they're coming, and we prepare. We go to other countries with floods and tsunamis, and we don't send bombs and bullets. We send the best of what we've got. The doctors, educated people, all kinds of help. It's not like we don't know that problems are coming in other countries. Why don't we get ahead of the curve of a disaster in the making and send the best of what we've got in order to forestall what the military-industrial complex is waiting for, a war? And then that makes some people outrageously wealthy and other people crying at the graveside.
You know, I have a fairly pessimistic answer to the solution. The solution is collapse. I mean, everything we're doing is creating a system that has to collapse.
Including the icebergs.
Yeah, well, the whole climate crisis represents population's collapse. So the just peace building framework is exactly that, Pat. It is the skill set that we ought to have in place for post-collapse life. And it does mean living with less, living more simply. I think that the skills, I think we do know, and I think they're being defined. And I think that conversation has even taken place at the highest level of policy discussion in the US government and in the United Nations. I think we are seeing a transformation of engagement around the world. Now that also makes me nervous, because as often as not we then use those tools to our benefit. We have an interest in that. But I think that the prospect is for collapse, and that just peace building represents a starting place.
The Good Friday Agreement.
I think that, I agree with, we are definitely leaning towards a collapse. We're leaning towards a collapse of the US dollar and the international order. It's just, how are we going to manage that collapse? Right? How is that going to be? Is it going to, like a lot of collapses, with increased war? So the United States no longer has this huge military structure, which is going to dwindle down, whether we want to or not, it's going to dwindle down. Is that going to lead to a lot of more interstate war? Are the Europeans going to start fighting wars again? I mean, once the Pax Americana ends. So, yeah, how's that collapse going to be managed? It's a difficult question.
I passed you
I wanted to pick up on something that was said earlier about the U.S. as being a myth maker. Yes, there are many myths in the United States that are being developed and have been going along as a myth, a storyline for a long time. Whenever the U.S. warmongers, I was going to say government, parts of the government aren't interested in war necessarily, but whenever there is a plan, such as the one that exists today in the Middle East, for the Middle East, the U.S., along with Israel, has definitely wanted to control the Middle East. Yes. And we know this from Iraq, which was a war that was fake. Well, it wasn't a fake war, it was a real war, but it was fought for reasons that were fake. And Afghanistan as well.
even Al-Qaeda would not have been so powerful if we hadn't gone into that war. But anyway, that's not the point I want to raise. As far as myth-making goes, we have been demonizing another country now for a number of years. And that country, you all know, is Iran. It seems to me that the United States is begging, looking for any possibility to get into a war with Iran. Iran has been demonized, even though Iran didn't actually, Iran wasn't the aggressor in Iraq, it was the other way around. But there are people in the U.S. who claim that it was Iraq who was the aggressor. It's a storyline that isn't going to have a good ending unless we change it. And this is what I want to ask both of you, or anyone else. How can that storyline be changed? If it isn't changed, and there's a war there, it's going to be a disaster.
Well, FR doesn't have a great success record, but it has a great history of sending civilian delegations to countries where there's a prospect of war. So in the last 6 years, we've sent 1 or 2 delegations every year to Iran. I was struck by the conversation in the New York Times today of Ahmadinejad's support of Mashai as the next prospective president, because I've sat with both Ahmadinejad and Mashai in New York on a number of Septembers in a row, and it's fascinating to see it arise. But I think it's getting King and everyone else getting to know the other is the only solution. So it's the delegations, the exchanges that are the answers to how.
This conversation is disturbing to me because it's so political and so theoretical and so philosophical that the realities that take place on battlefields and in countries where we go to war, as well as our own country where we have veterans that are going to war, we pay no attention. We're not in this group paying any attention. So the equation that came into my mind just now is, how many meals a year would you go without in order to save a human life? Give me a number.
$52 to $100.
I guess the same, I'm not sure where you're going, but.
You don't have to be sure I'm saying. How many meals would you go without to save a human life?
600. He wants to pay 600.
Okay, so.
He wants a day, that's 2
The
meals a
point
day.
is that we need to get this thing down on the ground and out of our heads to some degree and realize that there are human beings on both sides
Yeah,
of
I
the
totally,
equation.
I mean.
We can stand behind rhetoric and politics and philosophy and history. And what we basically do in this country is we don't pay any attention to the 1% that is out there on the battlefield or to the enemy that we're killing.
I wouldn't say that, I mean.
I'm going to say that.
I'm ready to get out of Afghanistan tomorrow. I think they're moving out. I don't think we're going to go to war with Iran, at least not under Obama. I mean, he may say a lot of rhetoric, he ain't going to war with Iran. Now, if we elected Mitt Romney, we may have gone to war with Iran. But that would be a mitigated disaster in so many levels I can't even get into. It's scary.
Why do you think that?
That we're not going to go to war? Well,
Yeah.
Obama's not going to go to war with Iran.
Do you think Israel
Well,
will
the
go
news,
to war?
I heard the news today say that North Korea just moved a major weapon to the east coast of North Korea. Why?
Let me just
It's a long story.
the war will go on, is going on, way after it ends. You look at the suicide rates. There are already more veterans that have committed suicide. This will continue from now on for the rest of their lives.
Right.
There's more Vietnam veterans today killing themselves than any other veteran group.
Whenever you fight a war, the casualties go on for generations. It happened in every single war. It happened in World War II. We don't talk about it as much. One of the reasons for the drug use in this country was the World War II veterans coming home addicted to morphine and stuff like that. And that helped create part of the drug culture. So, I mean, the cost of these wars is gonna be trillions of dollars, which are gonna be paid generations.
It's not dollars.
If I could step in,
They're not gonna
I
pay
think